Due Process, winner of 21 regional Emmy Awards, including the 2010 New York Emmy for our coverage of voting rights and the 2012 Mid-Atlantic Emmys for Outstanding Interview Special and Outstanding Discussion Series. Due Process is a presentation of Rutgers School of Law, Newark, and the Edward J. Blaustein School of Planning and Public Policy. Studio facilities provided by the Rutgers ITV Studio, Division of Continuing Studies.
A little apart's not bad. It just gives you a little buzz.
And millions agree. Both blacks and whites smoke marijuana, and studies show in roughly equal numbers. Then why are African Americans nearly 4 times more likely to get busted? An ACLU study raises disturbing new questions about race, pot, and justice on this edition of Due Process.
Major funding for Due Process provided by the Fund for New Jersey, supporting informed citizens for an effective democracy.
So you smoke marijuana, but what's your chance of arrest? Well, if you're in Washington State or Colorado, the answer is 0. They've legalized pot. But in the other 48, your risk may be determined by your race. I'm Raymond Brown.
And I'm Sandra King, and a new report from the ACLU confirms what you might have already expected, that your chance of escaping arrest improves enormously if you're white. In fact, the national report, based on government statistics, shows that whites and blacks use in similar numbers. But if you're black, you're nearly 4 times more likely to get busted.
It was a statistic we couldn't ignore. So we invited some friends to help us make sense of it. Ofer is executive director of the New Jersey branch of the ACLU. Bob Bianchi, now in private practice, is the immediate past prosecutor from Morris County. And Alan Bowman practices criminal defense law in Newark. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
Udi, I have to start with you and ask, given the fact that this seems to be a front-end problem, a problem related to arrests, is it conspiracy, overt racism, police strategy? What's the dynamic of this?
Well, first, to be clear, white people get arrested for marijuana possession also. And in fact, in the past 10 years, more than 8 million people have been arrested for marijuana. An arrest for marijuana happens every 37 seconds in our country. It is also undisputably true that if you're a black person, nationally, you're 3.7 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana. And here in New Jersey, it's 2.8 times more likely. What are the reasons behind that? Well, there are several. First of all, we saw in the 1980s a shift from a rehabilitative model of drug rehabilitation policies to a punitive model of the war on drugs. And in the 1990s, we saw the proliferation of a new policing model called broken windows policing, where neighborhoods, primarily communities of color, were flooded with police officers whose primary job was to crack down on minor offenses in the hope that this will prevent individuals from engaging in larger offenses. And what we've seen is that there's a greater entanglement between police officers and young men of color in particular in communities of color than there are in white communities. So for example, if you're a white man in his 20s who lives in Montclair and decides to smoke marijuana with his or her friends, the chances that you're going to see a police officer on the street are slim. But if you're a black man living in Newark in his 20s and you decide to smoke marijuana with your friends, the chances that you're going to see a police officer who will then arrest you or give you a summons are much higher. And that's why we're seeing these disparities.
But, Udi, there's the copy of your report. The cover says billions of dollars wasted on racially biased arrests. Is that accurate?
It's absolutely accurate. First of all, nationally in 2010 alone, we spent $3.6 billion on marijuana arrests. Here in New Jersey in 2010, we spent $127 million.
Yeah, but is this inadvertent racism or is this conscious racism?
I think it's
what are we looking at?
I think what you're dealing here is with the system that is doomed to fail. And that is a system that really has 2 types of police departments. one police department that's used in primarily communities of color, and that's a police department that's focused on order maintenance policing, where they crack down on every little infraction of the law, whether it's jaywalking or walking on the street through stop and frisk practices or engaging in loitering. And you see a different police department that's reserved for white, more affluent neighborhoods, where the police treat community members with greater respect, and they'll not look if minor infractions are happening. That's the result of what we're seeing. And in addition to that, yes, you do have those few bad apples out there. And because we don't have strong accountability mechanisms, those police officers are able to get away with it.
Bob, put your prosecutor hat back on for a moment. Sure. Can a society with a history, an acknowledged history of racism and racial insensitivity, tolerate disparities like this over a long time and still consider themselves to be rendering justice?
Yeah, I think that you have to look at a bigger picture as to what these statistics are showing. Of course, anything that's racially motivated, and it was a great question that was asked, is it purposeful is the way I would put it, or does it have an unintended consequence? I found the examples to be exactly the opposite as the county prosecutor, as a civil rights advocate, as a person who's done criminal defense for many years. I find in the more affluent areas, I've worked in the Hudson County Prosecutor's Office, the Essex County Prosecutor's Office, and the Morris County Prosecutor's Office now. It is in the suburban counties where the minor offenses are being aggressively prosecuted, marijuana arrests, things of that nature. And in more of the urban communities, there's a different thing that's going on that's explaining why these marijuana arrests are being made, but it's the police are not really
What is that
pursuing
different
them.
thing? You have a different analysis of why this is happening.
Yeah, I do. I think as the prosecutor especially, I think I was in a very unique county. We had an urban, suburban community, and in the 44 law enforcement agencies we had with 44 different chiefs, we have 44 different perspectives based on the crime problem in each of those jurisdictions. In the area where you had an urban population, where we would use not broken windows theory, we used intelligence-led policing. Intelligence-led policing is looking at crime data, finding out where your crime problems are, which represents the greatest danger to the community, and they typically were in urban areas. And in those areas, what you had was the community of the 99.9% of the people that are living the life the right way, working hard, living in very adverse circumstances, but they were plagued with drugs and gangs and guns and people hanging out. If you looked at the beginning of your promo, you saw people smoking pot outside. So that makes it an open air drug market. In those areas, there's actually dealing and distribution and things occurring right on the street, as opposed to the more affluent areas where those things are occurring more inside the
Can I
home.
interrupt for a second, though? Because when you look at the statistics, the people who are getting arrested for possession and not for dealing or distribution. So close to 22,000 people in New Jersey alone in 2010 were arrested for marijuana possession, not for dealing or distribution.
And how many of those people were involved in possessing drugs as a result of a drug distribution that occurred?
None of the 22,000, and I'll tell you why. Because, under the FBI's UCR rules, there's a hierarchy rule.
What's UCR?
UCR, the Uniform Crime Reporting Statistics, which is the way
You don't
that
have to go in. I just wanted people to know what it meant.
Yeah, but that's the reason we have this data. They only include the highest charge in their reporting. So when we say that close to 22,000 people were arrested for marijuana possession in New Jersey alone, that means that that's the most serious offense that they were involved
For that individual or the other individual?
Well, but they weren't buying. They weren't charged with buying.
This is the problem that I have with these statistics. Statistics, you have to look at if you don't do a qualitative analysis, which this report says, and in fact it was not looking at it in a qualitative way. You need to be able to look at these cases and you need to be able to understand what's going on inside these cases. And I'm telling you, all I'm trying to say here is that many times the police were attacked for not being in the community, for not being aggressive with people that are on the street corners and drinking and these quality of life
Bob,
problems
let me bring Alan in here because I know he's got something to say. But let me begin by asking you. Bob seems to be suggesting that the reason more focuses on a black pot smoker in Newark than in Morristown would be, or in Montclair, would be that the community wants it.
Well,
Is it that simple?
Well, no. It's not that simple. I'll start with the fact that for an African-American lawyer like myself, who also happens to be Muslim, that these kind of conversations are not academic, because every time there is any form of report, the ultimate result is that black people are disproportionately disadvantaged by whatever the effort is, whether it be law enforcement training, interdiction or whatever. We start with the institutionalized policy of profiling in state police a few years ago. Nobody was really surprised by that. There was no great societal outrage. I think the view was just do it a little better next time. Supreme Court report years ago came out. Supreme Court found that there was sentencing disparity amongst blacks and other people, and it was racially based. I don't think that that has been, mitigated in any fashion. I think that Mr. Ofer talked about a black kid in West Orange smoking marijuana having some degree of what you might call de facto immunity because of locale. If that black kid is smoking with a black kid in West Orange, he's probably more likely to get arrested if he's smoking with a white kid. And that black kid is smoking by himself, he's more likely to get arrested in West Orange than a white kid. I tell you, I live in a suburb, and I had a little cookout the other day. My son has a friend who's a relatively unaccomplished fellow. He's an artist, has no material success in life, but he's a very decent guy. Came over for the cookout. I said, you never start coming over again so we can talk. He said, Mr. Bowman, whenever I ride into this neighborhood, the police harass me. I said, well, I understand it, and to some degree in my neighborhood because of the taxes, and you got little kids playing. Yes, I think the community supports a certain level of blind eye to rights because they want to keep the community safe, but it's not appropriate.
Right, let me ask the question to all three of you. I mean, the sentencing schemes that exist in the United States and in New Jersey have for decades been designed to be offense-based and designed for the purpose, ostensibly, of eradicating differences in race based on sentencing. So how can you have these kinds of disparities at the back end in incarceration if you have these schemes that in theory are designed under the guidelines and then under our offense-based scheme in New Jersey to even out those and make sure that a white guy in Hunterdon County gets the same amount of time as a black guy in Newark if they're arrested for the same offense? Does that mean the systems aren't working?
That's where the problem is, and I don't disagree that there are disparities, and clearly, but it needs to be put in its proper context. I do not believe for the majority of law enforcement, and I did civil rights, there are cops that are bad cops out there. They need to be taken care of, no question about it. But when they pass the 1,000-foot law, for example, or the 500-foot law afterwards, being tough on crime, and with all these mandatory sentencings that prosecutors themselves do not like and judges don't like, in my opinion, a majority of them, because their hands are being tied.
What you're talking about are statutes that give mandatory sentences if you're arrested within a certain distance of a school.
Sure.
Okay.
So when
And who was hit hardest?
The African American and Hispanic populations, and we need to understand that's not as a result of something law enforcement is doing, but if you were to look at the 1,000-foot map, we call it, or the 500-foot map, when I was an assistant prosecutor in Hudson County, virtually I believe every street within Hudson County and Jersey City was within 1,000 foot of a school. So for the same offense, where African Americans or Hispanics that are in public housing, for example, are clearly going to be within those jurisdictions. In Hunterdon County, as you mentioned, for the same exact offense, is not within 1,000 foot or 500 foot of a school. What's the consequence for the same exact activity? The person that's within 1,000 foot goes to state prison for a mandatory 3 years to 5 years, 3 years for parole and eligibility, where the person in an affluent area that is not next to those schools or what have you is not sent to jail and given probation. And worse yet, and just one thing before Alan goes, is what we started to see where arrests are being made at 4 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday and in the summertime when school is not even in session. And those people still, under our laws, were under the mandatory sentencing guidelines. When the defense objected to the disformity, if you will, between the two places, they passed guidelines. The Supreme Court indicated that unless you treat everybody equally, you have to give everybody the same exact sentence. So that basically started warehousing people like Cordwood in state prison.
Alan, go.
You have to ask the question, from my perspective, as a prosecutor or a lawmaker, the sort of, incipient question is whether or not it makes sense to criminalize marijuana, particularly small amounts, and to have people walk around adjudicated guilty of paraphernalia because they had rolling papers in their pocket. And they go to get a job, he had paraphernalia, must be some bad fella, and maybe it conjures up some view in somebody's house that they had, somebody's might have had a syringe or something. I think that has to be, if I was a prosecutor of a county or any place else, I would start with that concept with respect to whether or not this is sensible, efficacious law enforcement from the very beginning.
And in fact, Alan, that's where the report, the ACLU report, winds up.
That's right.
Your most important recommendation?
Well, is that marijuana should be licensed, should be regulated, and should be legalized for people 21 or over.
But there's a national report. What's been the response of legislators across the country?
Oh, Bill Brand, who was the police commissioner of New York City, the police commissioner of LA, is now being considered again for New York, for the NYPD, said that it is inevitable that marijuana will be legalized in the United States.
But he's not a legislator. He's a prominent police officer who
Right.
served in some pretty
The
elite
legislators
positions.
take very seriously. There are plenty of lawmakers here in New Jersey and across the country that believe that marijuana should be legalized.
How many are willing to come out and say that and be accused of being soft on drugs?
Well, that is an issue. And one of the reasons for this report was to try to inform the narrative and inform the conversation in a better way to show that, number one, we are spending billions of dollars a year on policies that are ineffective. And this is a key point. If the goal of the war on marijuana was to reduce marijuana use in the United States, we have failed. In 2001, there was a government study about frequent users of marijuana that found about 6% of the population had used marijuana in the past month. In 2010, that same study found that it was 7%.
But let me come back to the point you made earlier. If you can't name the legislators who would favor this, because they've spoken to you in confidence,
Sure.
but say we want to move ahead, the kind of rational analysis you're suggesting, which is cost, benefit, and then look at the consequences, requires a deliberative legislative process. And I know you quoted Bratton, but really do you believe that it's likely that in New Jersey, for example, there'll be a serious legislative debate, that the House Judiciary Committee is
Right.
really going to look carefully at this and fold this into legislation?
I think what's going to happen in New
short term?
Jersey is that we'll first have a decriminalization of possession of marijuana of 50 grams or less, which is
When?
about 2
When do you
ounces.
think that can happen?
I think that will happen soon. I think, the legislative session is pretty much over already. We'll have a lame duck session, so I don't know if it'll happen this year, but I think it's going to happen soon. I think that will be the first step, decriminalization, and then the next step after that will be legalization, and I'll tell you why. Because Washington State alone, which just legalized marijuana, predicts that they will make about $500 million in new revenue because of this one policy change alone. So smart law enforcement people, smart fiscal conservatives, and libertarians will come together and realize that this is a policy that makes sense for everyone. And civil rights community.
And yet, Bob, I suspect that you would not argue with Udi's point that, in fact, there has not been progress in eradicating use of marijuana. And yet, I also suspect that you would not favor either legalization or decriminalization.
Well, I have a problem with the decriminalization because, again, you're putting the law enforcement community, and it depends on how it's done. If it's done with an attorney general guideline so that the police officers
Well, Udi would rather
know-
legalize.
Well, we're talking about two different things. Let's talk about decriminalization first.
Right. Uh-huh.
Okay. If you're to do that, then police officers themselves have been charged with official misconduct for improperly exercising their discretion.
Okay, so what
on who
about
is at their
legalization?
arresting. Well, look, that's a policy question, and I agree with this, that the legislators need to discuss.
But aren't you the kind of person who should be consulted on exactly that kind of
I
policy
think that the
question?
Prosecutors Association should be consulted, and the Prosecutors Association does weigh in on bills. But they don't do things by just looking at a massive amount of statistics. They do things by talking to, and I would suggest, and I've been told, that one of the best group of people to talk to are drug addicts. And people will tell you how marijuana for them, and this is the argument you'll get on the other side of this, was a gateway drug for them.
Well, but
Whether that's
so is
true
alcohol.
Or not, but that doesn't mean that two wrongs make a right.
Let me ask Alan a question, which is interesting. It seems to me that this is not a secret. This is an interesting study. Nothing in it is new, in the sense that we've known about significant racial disparities in drug incarceration for years. So, Alan, in the courtroom every day, everybody knows. The judges know, the prosecutors know, defense counsel know. Does it affect decision making? Do prosecutors, in your experience, take into account that this really isn't, if this black kid's arrested, it wouldn't have happened if he were white in the same town? Do judges in sentencing take it into account?
Well,
Openly or in some other way?
marijuana in small quantities, under 28 grams, I believe, is processed through municipal court. I don't have a significant municipal practice, but what a lot of people don't understand, how many times do they stop a car and the way they get in the trunk, we smelled marijuana. So you search the rest of the motor vehicle or you find a gun, that sort of thing. It's kind of like a convenient pretext for a lot of things. Now, when you talk about not being in favor of legalization, decriminalization, they decriminalized gambling when they made Atlantic City, and they thought they'd make money at it. So I suppose that's similar to what Washington State's hopefulness is. A lot of people became gambling addicted, that kind of thing. Things come with that.
People are making money, just not New Jersey.
But as Sandy says, I don't see a functional distinction between marijuana and alcohol, other than the fact that marijuana, I don't know, politically and otherwise, people are allowed to take a stand. I'm tough on drugs, that sort of thing. It's not a narcotic like heroin or cocaine, anything of that nature. And it's become a very strong and destructive pretextual tools for police officers to get involved in somebody's life. I said, smelled pot, that kind of thing. Stand in a hallway smoking pot. Neighbors call, they search them, they find 3 or 4 guns, that kind of thing. I think that it's symptomatic of a larger problem in our society, predominantly lack of jobs, social ills, social engineering, all those things people say you can't do in the context of the law, but you can, and you have to. And
Udi, you had something you wanted
Yeah, and I think I agree with everything that was said, and I'll add one additional factor, and that is new policing practices, and specifically new practices on how to measure productivity among police officers. Since the 1990s, there's been a huge emphasis on what's known as CompStat policing, which is a new data management system that tracks what do police officers do every day. And for anyone who's ever saw The Wire, you'll remember the scenes where the precinct commander has to sit before the chiefs and say, and basically fight for their job, to say, this is why you should keep me, and this is why I'm bringing crime down. Well, how do you measure productivity under CompStat policing? You measure it by counting how many summonses did you issue. You measure it by counting how many arrests did you make. So suddenly there's a fight for more arrests and more summonses among precinct commanders, and what you see is that they go after the low-hanging fruit.
But let me ask Bob, how open is the law enforcement community writ large in New Jersey or elsewhere to a detailed discussion of enforcement policies without demonizing people who have a different point of view, because if the cops stand up and go to the legislature and say, this guy is soft on crime, he's dead as a politician. So how open is the law enforcement community to having a real discussion about the issues that Udi's raised?
They're very open, and I worked with the ACLU's predecessor, Deborah Jacobs, on 2 very such reports like this, where we had major disagreements about the statistical analysis. For example, CompStat policing has now been overtaken by what we call intelligence-led policing, which is a resource-driven, high-level target package. I don't want to get into how CompStat's all done, over with in New Jersey. I've worked on 2
Especially
governors.
since we only have 3 minutes left.
2 governors' crime bills, and know that for a fact because I was part of those crime packages, so I was part of that. But they're very open. But if we're using language that casts a net upon the law enforcement community that they are racist or that they're doing something that's inappropriate, we're not entertaining a dialogue that's healthy. Now, when I've worked with the ACLU, with the police officers about confidential informant policies as well as
Udi says he agrees.
illegals.
Let's
Udi,
stay
what's
on
your
marijuana
best
for these last 2 minutes.
non-accusatory 30-second statement about why law enforcement should support this?
I think it is better for police officers. They will be able to do their job in a better manner if they actually focus on serious crimes and not on low-level, nonviolent offenses like marijuana possession.
Do you agree with Udi's optimism?
I just want to say, I adamantly disagree with anybody who's of the view that we don't need in our society to escalate the discussion about race and the negative ramifications on us who are black. Race is a part of our everyday life and yours, and nobody talks about it. Barack Obama, people like that, to stimulate a more, focused discourse that brings about some results. I'm 61 years old, Browns. A little bit of long tooth. We've been battling this for years, and we need some help.
Bob, let me ask you this: do you share Udi's view that whatever you think about it, the legislature might have an open debate in the next 2 years about this subject that might lead to reform legislation?
It's my hope that they don't just stop with this particular issue. It's my hope that we stop becoming a blame society and a shame
But are
society.
you optimistic that they will have a serious debate, one you'd be proud of about this issue?
Yes, I think that they should do that, and they should think about the collateral consequences of what's happening by warehousing people in jail, mandatory sentences, take the shackles off prosecutors and judges so that we can look at each individual case on its own merits and make decisions so that we don't have to be so draconian. And then for the rest of these people's lives, young people, typically, they live attached with the stigma of having a criminal conviction, not the ability to get a job, and it has very draconian consequences.
Bob, I'm going to have to stop you there. You get the last word. With my thanks to all of you, though there's so much more to say about racial bias in criminal justice, the war on drugs, and the ongoing criminal position of pot throughout most of America.
They're the kind of questions we raise here on Due Process, and the reason you'll want to join us next week and every week for cutting-edge issues of justice and law, issues like the ubiquitous nature of the plea bargain. Our show just honored by the New Jersey Broadcasters Association with its annual Best of the Best Award. You can also watch us on demand at dueprocesstv.rutgers.edu and tell us what you think by going to our contact page or sending us an email. For Sandy and all of us here, I'm Raymond Brown. Thanks for watching.
Studies clearly show that white adolescents and young adults are much more likely to smoke marijuana than African American youth. It is actually African American youth who are much more likely to be arrested and convicted of marijuana consumption.
Want even more insight on law and justice? Become a fan of Due Process on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and watch us on demand on YouTube.